The sound of gunshots in the distance was nothing unusual in Willow Creek, but the piercing scream that followed sent tremors down Penelope Fletcher's spine. She dropped her basket of freshly picked herbs, scattering them across the wooden porch of her father's apothecary. Something about that scream was different, a woman's cry not of fear, but of righteous indignation cut short by force. Penelope had heard that sound too many times before. It was 1876, a year when the nation celebrated its centennial with great fanfare in the eastern cities. But here in the Colorado Territory, civilization remained a thin veneer over the harsh realities of frontier life. Women were expected to be silent observers, meek companions to the men who supposedly tamed the wild, even when those same men proved to be more savage than the wilderness itself. Penelope gathered her skirts and rushed toward the commotion without a second thought. At 22, she'd long ago stopped caring what the townsfolk thought of her unfeminine tendencies to insert herself into situations that weren't considered proper for a lady. Her auburn hair, hastily pinned that morning, was coming loose with each determined stride. The scene that greeted her outside the Silver Dollar Saloon made her blood boil. A woman lay sprawled in the dirt, her hand pressed against her reddening cheek. Above her stood Randall Whitaker, the owner of the largest cattle ranch in the county, and a man known for his quick temper and quicker hands. "I told you to shut that mouth of yours," Whitaker bellowed, his face contorted with rage. "Women don't get to have opinions about business dealings in my town." The woman on the ground was Elizabeth Cooper, the schoolteacher who had arrived just 3 months ago. She'd quickly earned a reputation for being difficult, because she dared to speak about things like fair wages for the laundresses and proper schooling for all children, regardless of their parentage or skin color. "This isn't your town," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling but resolute as she struggled to stand. "And I have every right to—" Whitaker raised his hand again, and Penelope surged forward without thinking. "Stop it," she shouted, placing herself between Elizabeth and the enraged rancher. "Have you no shame, striking a lady in broad daylight?" Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Fletcher's daughter. I might have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong, just like your dead mother never knew when to hold her tongue." The mention of her mother sent a sharp pain through Penelope's chest, but she stood her ground. "My mother taught me that silence in the face of injustice is no virtue, Mr. Whitaker. Now back away before I call the sheriff." Whitaker laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Sheriff Dixon. The man who plays cards with me every Thursday night. Go ahead, girl." He stepped closer, his breath hot on her face, reeking of whiskey though it was barely past noon. "You need a reminder of a woman's place too," before Penelope could respond. A deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I believe the ladies asked you to stop." The crowd that had gathered parted to reveal a man Penelope had never seen before. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a dusty black coat. A cowboy hat cast shadows over his face, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. "And who might you be?" Whitaker spat, turning his attention to the newcomer. "Name's Henry Travis," the stranger said, his voice steady and unhurried. He didn't touch the gun at his hip, but something in his stance suggested he knew how to use it. "Just rode into town looking for a quiet drink, not a man beating on women in the street." "This doesn't concern you, stranger," Whitaker said, though he took a half-step back. "I disagree," Henry Travis replied, moving closer. "Where I come from, men who hit women aren't considered men at all." Whitaker's hand twitched near his holster. "You threatening me, boy?" "Not at all," Henry said, his eyes never leaving Whitaker's. "Just making an observation about what constitutes a man. Now, why don't you head back into the saloon and cool that temper?" unless you're more interested in finding out if you're faster than me." A tense moment passed. Penelope held her breath. Finally, Whitaker spat on the ground near Henry's boots. "This ain't over," he muttered before turning back toward the saloon. "And you ladies better watch yourselves." Once Whitaker was gone, Penelope knelt beside Elizabeth, helping her to her feet. "Are you hurt badly?" "Just my pride," Elizabeth said, touching her reddened cheek gingerly. Henry Travis approached them, removing his hat. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, with a natural wave that suggested he wasn't particularly concerned with appearances. Up close, Penelope could see his eyes were a striking shade of green like the first spring leaves. "Madam," he said with a nod to Elizabeth. "That's quite a mark he left." "Thank you for stepping in," Elizabeth said, straightening her dress. "Though I fear you've made an enemy before you've even had that drink." "Wouldn't be the first time," he replied with a slight smile that transformed his serious face. He turned to Penelope, and for a moment she felt oddly exposed under his gaze. "You've got courage standing up to a man like that." "As do you," Penelope replied, finding her voice. "Randall Whitaker isn't someone to cross lightly in Willow Creek." "Bullies are the same everywhere," Henry said with a shrug. "Big until someone stands up to them." A small crowd still lingered, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Penelope became acutely aware of how this must look: two unmarried women conversing with a strange man in the middle of the street. "My father's shop is just down the way," Penelope said to Elizabeth. "Let me get you something for that cheek." "I'll escort you both," Henry offered, putting his hat back on. "If that's acceptable." Elizabeth nodded gratefully, but Penelope felt a strange resistance. This man was a stranger, and experience had taught her to be cautious around men who appeared heroic. Too often, they expected payment for their gallantry in forms she wasn't willing to give. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Travis," she said coolly. "We can manage." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "As you wish, Miss Fletcher. Penelope Fletcher, Miss Fletcher," he nodded. "Perhaps we'll meet again under more pleasant circumstances." As Penelope led Elizabeth away, she could feel his eyes on her back. She wasn't sure if the sensation prickling her skin was discomfort or something else entirely. "He seemed nice," Elizabeth murmured as they walked. "Perhaps," Penelope replied noncommittally. "But nice isn't always good, and good isn't always nice. My father says to judge a man by his actions over time, not a single heroic moment." "Your father sounds wise," Elizabeth said. "He is," Penelope agreed, thinking of the gentle apothecary who had raised her alone after her mother's death. "Though some in town call him odd for teaching me to read medical texts and mix remedies." They reached the apothecary shop, a neat wooden building with large windows displaying bottles of various shapes and sizes. The sign above the door read, "Fletcher's Remedies," in carefully painted letters. Inside, the familiar scents of herbs and tinctures greeted Penelope, bringing a sense of calm after the confrontation. Her father, Gerald Fletcher, looked up from where he was grinding something with mortar and pestle, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed, setting down his work when he saw Elizabeth's face. "What happened?" "Randall Whitaker happened," Penelope said grimly, guiding Elizabeth to a chair. While her father prepared a soothing compress, Penelope recounted the incident, including the intervention of the stranger named Henry Travis. "Brave of him to stand against Whitaker, especially being new in town," Gerald remarked, gently applying the compress to Elizabeth's cheek. "Not many would risk that." "He said he was just looking for a quiet drink," Penelope said, arranging bottles on a nearby shelf, mostly to avoid meeting her father's perceptive gaze. "Probably passing through." "Perhaps," Gerald said in a tone that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Though we could use more men of principle around here. The bell above the door jingled, and they all looked up to see Sheriff Dixon entering, his badge glinting in the afternoon light. Dixon was a heavy-set man with a perpetually red face who took his orders from the wealthiest men in town, chief among them, Randall Whitaker. "Heard there was some trouble at the Silver Dollar," he said, his small eyes taking in Elizabeth's bruised face without apparent concern. "Yes," Penelope replied, crossing her arms. Mr. Whitaker struck Miss Cooper for daring to speak her mind. Dixon sighed as if the whole matter was terribly inconvenient. "Miss Fletcher, you know how these misunderstandings can get blown out of proportion. Mr. Whitaker says the schoolteacher was stirring up trouble, talking about women's voting rights and such nonsense right in the saloon." "And that justifies hitting her?" Penelope demanded. "Watch your tone, girl," Dixon warned. "I'm here as a courtesy." "Mr. Whitaker is concerned about that stranger who threatened him. Travis, I believe the name was." "Mr. Travis didn't threaten anyone," Elizabeth spoke up, removing the compress. "He simply intervened when Mr. Whitaker was about to strike me again." Dixon adjusted his belt, which strained to contain his substantial girth. "Well, if you see this Travis fella, tell him Sheriff Dixon would like a word. We don't take kindly to outsiders causing trouble." "The only one causing trouble was Whitaker," Penelope said, unable to contain her frustration. Dixon's face darkened. "You do well to remember your place, Miss Fletcher. Your father may indulge your outspokenness, but the rest of this town has less patience." After the sheriff left, Gerald Fletcher sighed deeply. "Penelope, my dear, you must be more careful. Your mother had the same fire in her, and I admired it greatly, but it got her ostracized and then dead," Penelope finished. The story was as familiar as her own reflection. Her mother, Margaret Fletcher, had been an educated woman from Boston who never adjusted to the constraints of frontier life. Her advocacy for the local Ute tribes and criticism of how they were treated had made her enemies. The official story was that she died of influenza, but Penelope had always suspected her treatment by the town. The isolation, the stress had weakened her to the point where the illness took her more easily. "I was going to say it made her extraordinary," Gerald said gently. "But yes, it came with a cost. I just worry for you." "I know, Father," Penelope said, squeezing his hand, "but I cannot be silent just to make others comfortable." "Nor should you be," came a voice from the doorway. Henry Travis stood there, hat in hand, looking somewhat sheepish at having interrupted. "Pardon the intrusion. The door was ajar." Penelope felt a rush of something, annoyance perhaps, or something else she couldn't quite name. "Mr. Travis, what brings you here?" "I wanted to check on Miss Cooper," he said, nodding respectfully to Elizabeth, "and to apologize if my involvement complicated matters." "You have nothing to apologize for," Elizabeth assured him. "I'm grateful for your intervention." Gerald stepped forward, extending his hand. "Gerald Fletcher. I understand you came to my daughter's aid earlier. You have my thanks." Henry shook his hand firmly. "Henry Travis, sir, and I didn't do much. Your daughter was already standing her ground quite admirably when I arrived." His eyes met Penelope's briefly, and she felt an unexpected warmth in her cheeks. She turned away, busying herself with organizing items that didn't need organizing. "Sheriff Dixon is looking for you," she said without looking at him. "Something about outsiders causing trouble," Henry chuckled. "Yes, I've already had the pleasure. We had a brief but illuminating conversation about local hospitality." "And," Gerald prompted, "and I informed him I'd be staying in town for a while. I've taken a room at the boarding house." This made Penelope turn around. "Staying? I thought you were passing through." "That was my intention," Henry admitted, but I've been offered work at the livery stable. Mr. Peterson needs help breaking horses, and that happens to be something I'm good at." "Amos Peterson is a good man," Gerald nodded approvingly. "One of the few in town who stands on his own principles." "So I gathered," Henry replied. His gaze returned to Penelope, who found herself suddenly very interested in the label of a tonic bottle. "Miss Fletcher, I was hoping to speak with you privately for a moment, if that's acceptable." Penelope looked to her father, who nodded with an infuriating twinkle in his eye. "I'll see Miss Cooper home," Gerald said, helping Elizabeth to her feet. "Take your time." After they left, an awkward silence filled the shop. Penelope straightened her apron, aware that several strands of hair had escaped her pins during the day's excitement. "What did you wish to speak about, Mr. Travis?" she finally asked. Henry seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I overheard what you said earlier about not being silent to make others comfortable." He turned his hat in his hands. "I wanted to tell you that you reminded me of something my mother used to say." This wasn't what Penelope had expected. "And what was that?" "She said that a person who speaks truth in a room full of lies stands tallest, even when seated." His smile was tinged with sadness. "She was Quaker, believed in equality and speaking one's mind plainly." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Penelope said, softening slightly. "She was." The past tense hung in the air between them. "She died during the war helping at a field hospital, typhoid." "I'm sorry," Penelope said sincerely. "I lost my mother too, 8 years ago." Henry nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It changes you, doesn't it? Makes you see the world differently." "Yes," Penelope agreed, surprised by his perception. "It does." Another silence fell, but this one felt less strained. "There was something else," Henry said finally. "After what happened today, Whitaker might hold a grudge against you and Miss Cooper. I'd like to offer my assistance if needed." Penelope's pride bristled immediately. "We've managed Randall Whitaker for years without a protector, Mr. Travis." "I'm not offering protection, Miss Fletcher," he clarified, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I'm offering alliance. There's a difference." "And what would this alliance entail?" she asked skeptically. "Information, for one. I'm good at noticing things, patterns of behavior. And sometimes, just having another person willing to stand with you makes others think twice." He shrugged. "Beyond that, I'm handy in a fight, though I prefer to avoid them when possible." Penelope studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. Men didn't offer alliance to women without expecting something in return in her experience. "And what would you want in exchange for this?" "Alliance," she asked bluntly. If he was offended by her directness, he didn't show it. Instead, he laughed a genuine, warm sound that transformed his face entirely. "Nothing, Miss Fletcher. Believe it or not, some people just do things because they're right." She wasn't entirely convinced, but found herself intrigued despite her better judgment. "I'll consider your offer, Mr. Travis, but I make no promises." "Fair enough," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll bid you good day, then." As he turned to leave, Penelope called after him, "Mr. Travis." He paused at the door. "Yes, thank you for what you did today." The words felt strange on her tongue. She wasn't accustomed to thanking men for basic decency. He tipped his hat slightly. "You don't have to lower your voice here, Miss Fletcher, or anywhere else for that matter." With that, he was gone, leaving Penelope with a curious feeling that something significant had just shifted in her carefully ordered world. The next few days passed with an unusual quietness that put Penelope on edge. Randall Whitaker had retreated to his ranch outside town, and Sheriff Dixon made himself scarce around the apothecary. Elizabeth Cooper's cheek healed, leaving only a faint yellowish bruise that she covered with powder when teaching at the schoolhouse. Penelope went about her routine, helping her father with the shop, gathering herbs from the hills above town, delivering remedies to those too ill or infirm to visit the apothecary. But she found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Henry Travis. She saw him occasionally from a distance working with horses at the livery, carrying lumber to help repair the church roof, sharing a meal with Amos Peterson at the cafe. He seemed to be integrating himself into town life with remarkable ease for a newcomer. She noticed women watching him with interest, including the widow Simmons, who was known to pursue any eligible man who stayed in town longer than a week. On Friday afternoon, Penelope was returning from delivering a tonic to old Mrs. Gunderson when she encountered Henry walking down the main street, deep in conversation with a man she recognized as one of Whitaker's ranch hands. The ranch hand noticed her first and abruptly ended the conversation, tipping his hat nervously before hurrying away. Henry turned and spotted her, his face breaking into a smile that she found irritatingly disarming. "Miss Fletcher," he greeted her, falling into step beside her. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," she agreed, glancing at the retreating figure of the ranch hand. "Making friends with Whitaker's men already?" "Just gathering information," Henry replied easily. "Tom there isn't particularly loyal to Whitaker. Says the man's been in a foul mood since our encounter, taking it out on his workers." Penelope frowned. "That's concerning." "It is," Henry agreed. "But also useful to know. Whitaker's planning something, Tom wasn't sure what, but there's been a lot of closed-door meetings with some of the other ranchers." They had reached the apothecary shop. Penelope hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to come in for tea?" "My father is visiting patients at the mining camp and won't be back until evening." Henry looked surprised but pleased. "I'd like that very much." Inside, Penelope busied herself with the kettle, acutely aware of Henry examining the shelves of medicines and herbs with genuine interest. "Your father's work is impressive," he remarked, carefully reading the labels. "These formulations are quite sophisticated." "He studied medicine in Philadelphia before coming west," Penelope explained, arranging cups on a tray. "He hoped to establish a proper doctor's office, but the town wasn't ready for his modern ideas. So he adapted, learning from local healers and combining their knowledge with his training." "And he taught you," Henry observed. "Yes. Some think it inappropriate, but he believes knowledge shouldn't be restricted by gender." She brought the tea to the small table in the corner of the shop. "What about you, Mr. Travis? You're clearly educated, yet you break horses for a living." Henry accepted the cup she offered. "I've had various occupations. Fought in the war, worked cattle drives, served as a marshal in Kansas for a time." "A marshal?" Penelope raised an eyebrow. "That's a significant detail to omit in our previous conversations." He shrugged. "It ended badly. I enforced the law equally, which some powerful men didn't appreciate. Eventually, I was encouraged to seek employment elsewhere." "So you've made enemies of powerful men before," Penelope noted. "It seems to be a recurring theme in my life," he admitted with a wry smile. "Why Willow Creek?" she asked directly. "There must be dozens of towns where you could break horses without inserting yourself into local conflicts." Henry considered her over the rim of his teacup. "Truthfully, I was just passing through. But then I saw a man hit a woman in broad daylight while others stood by, and I saw you just one person willing to step between them. It made me curious about what kind of town this was, what kind of people lived here. And what have you concluded?" "That, like most places, Willow Creek has good people who do too little and not so good people who do too much." His green eyes held her steadily. "But it also has people like you and your father, who stand apart." Penelope felt a strange flutter in her chest at the intensity of his gaze. She looked away, focusing on pouring more tea. "You still haven't told me what you're planning to do about Whitaker," she said, changing the subject. I'm not planning to do anything about him, Henry replied. Men like that usually bring themselves down eventually. I'm just keeping an eye out to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else in the process. That's unexpectedly patient, Penelope admitted. Henry laughed. I've learned that rushing only works in dime novels. Real change takes time and careful action. They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Penelope had expected. Henry told her about growing up in Ohio with his Quaker mother and pragmatic father, about fighting for the Union despite his mother's pacifist beliefs, about the disillusionment that followed seeing the corruption that persisted even after the war ended. In return, Penelope found herself sharing stories about her mother's quiet activism, her father's gentle guidance, and her own struggles to find a place in a town that valued women primarily as wives and mothers. "Have you never considered marriage?" Henry asked, then immediately looked abashed. "Forgive me, that's far too personal a question." "It's all right," Penelope said, surprising herself with her candor. "I've had offers, but none that would allow me to remain myself. The men here expect wives to abandon any interests beyond hearth and home." "That seems a waste," Henry commented. "A partner should enhance who you are, not diminish it." "Is that why you never married?" Penelope asked boldly. "Partly," he admitted. "And partly because my life hasn't been conducive to settling down. Hard to promise forever when you're not sure if you'll be run out of town within the year." The mention of being run out of town sobered their conversation. As Penelope showed Henry out, she found herself reluctant to end their talk. "Thank you for the tea and conversation, Miss Fletcher," he said, hat in hand at the door. "Penelope," she found herself saying. "My friends call me Penelope." His smile was warm. "Thank you, Penelope. I hope you'll call me Henry." After he left, Penelope tried to analyze the strange lightness she felt. It had been a long time since she'd spoken so openly with anyone besides her father or Elizabeth. Henry Travis was disarmingly easy to talk to, and she found his views refreshingly aligned with her own on many matters. But experience had taught her caution. Men could be charming when they wanted something, and she wasn't entirely convinced that Henry Travis was exactly who he presented himself to be. That evening, when her father returned from the mining camp, tired but satisfied with his day's work, she mentioned her conversation with Henry. "He seems to have made quite an impression on you," Gerald observed, his eyes twinkling despite his fatigue. "He's interesting," Penelope admitted reluctantly. "Different from most men in Willow Creek, but I'm still not certain of his intentions here." Gerald considered this as he removed his boots. "Sometimes, my dear, people are exactly what they appear to be. Not everyone has hidden motives." "You're too trusting, father," she said affectionately. "Perhaps," he conceded with a smile. "But I've found that expecting the best from people occasionally encourages them to deliver it." The next morning brought unexpected commotion to Willow Creek. Penelope was arranging the front display when she heard raised voices from the direction of the livery stable. Curious, she stepped outside to see a small crowd gathering. In the center of the street stood Randall Whitaker with 3 of his ranch hands. They faced Henry, who stood calmly in front of the livery, Amos Peterson at his side. "I'm telling you, Travis, that's my horse," Whitaker was saying loudly. "Peterson here stole it and I want it back, along with compensation for its use." "That's a lie and you know it, Randall," Amos replied, his weathered face flushed with anger. "I bought that mare fair and square from Bill Jenkins last spring. You're just sore about what happened with Miss Cooper." Penelope moved closer, concern growing as she saw Sheriff Dixon standing off to the side, making no move to intervene. "Are you calling me a liar, old man?" Whitaker demanded, stepping menacingly toward Amos. Henry moved slightly, positioning himself between Whitaker and the elderly stable owner. "Mr. Peterson has bill of sale documentation for that horse, Whitaker. I've seen it myself. This isn't about a horse, and we both know it." "Stay out of this, Travis," Whitaker snarled. "This doesn't concern you." "When you threaten my employer, it concerns me," Henry replied evenly. Whitaker's hand hovered near his gun. "You think you're something special because you stepped in to help those mouthy women. This town has rules, traditions. Outsiders like you don't get to come in and change things." "I haven't tried to change anything," Henry said, his voice remaining calm despite the tension. "I just believe women shouldn't be hit for speaking, and honest men shouldn't be falsely accused of theft." The crowd murmured. Penelope noticed several people nodding in agreement with Henry's words. Whitaker noticed too, and his face darkened. "Dixon," he called to the sheriff, "arrest this man for horse theft." Sheriff Dixon shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Randall, I can't arrest a man without evidence." "If Amos has a bill of sale." "Since when do you need evidence?" Whitaker demanded. "Do your job or I'll find someone who will." The threat hung in the air. Everyone knew Whitaker had been instrumental in getting Dixon elected and could just as easily support someone else next time. "Let's all calm down," Henry suggested. "Mr. Peterson, why don't you fetch that bill of sale? We can settle this properly." As Amos turned toward the stable, one of Whitaker's men suddenly lunged forward, shoving the old man roughly to the ground. In an instant, Henry was moving, his fist connecting with the ranch hand's jaw before anyone could react. The man crumpled to the dirt. "That was unnecessary," Henry said, helping Amos to his feet. Whitaker's hand went to his gun, but Henry was faster, not drawing his weapon, but moving to place himself directly in front of Whitaker, too close for the rancher to draw effectively. "You don't want to do that," Henry said quietly. "Not with all these witnesses." The tension crackled between them. Penelope held her breath, along with everyone else watching. Finally, Whitaker stepped back. "This isn't over, Travis. Not by a long shot." He glared at the crowd. "That goes for anyone else who forgets their place in this town." His eyes found Penelope in the crowd, and the malice in them sent a chill down her spine. As Whitaker and his men departed, Sheriff Dixon following meekly in their wake, the crowd began to disperse. Penelope approached Henry and Amos. "Are you all right, Mr. Peterson?" she asked, concerned by the elderly man's pallor. "Just my pride bruised a bit," Amos assured her, though he winced as he straightened. "Nothing I haven't handled before." "Let me check you over," she insisted. "Father has taught me enough to recognize if something's broken." While she examined Amos for injuries, finding nothing worse than a scraped elbow that she quickly cleaned and bandaged with supplies from her apothecary bag, she was acutely aware of Henry watching her work. "You're good at that," he commented when she finished. "Thank you," she replied, repacking her bag, "though I hope my skills won't be needed often in these circumstances." "Whitaker's getting desperate," Amos said, testing his bandaged elbow. "That business about my horse was pure fabrication." "He's testing boundaries," Henry agreed. "Seeing who'll stand with him and who won't." "Why now?" Penelope asked. "He's had power in this town for years." Henry and Amos exchanged glances. "There's an election coming for county commissioner," Amos explained. "Whitaker wants the position to expand his influence. But Harold Jenkins is also running, and he's been speaking about limiting the big ranchers' water rights to ensure small farmers have access, which would threaten Whitaker's plans to expand his herd," Henry added. "He needs to demonstrate his power now, show people what happens when they cross him." Penelope considered this. So his attack on Elizabeth wasn't just about her speaking out against him, it was a warning to others, Henry finished. "Exactly." Miss Cooper was organizing a meeting of the Women's Auxiliary to discuss supporting Jenkins, Amos said. Whitaker got wind of it and decided to make an example of her. Penelope felt a surge of outrage. That's unconscionable. Yes, Henry agreed grimly. And now he's identified his opposition, you, Elizabeth, Amos, me, and anyone else who doesn't fall in line. What do we do? Penelope asked, the question directed primarily at Henry. She realized belatedly. We continue living according to our principles, he replied, meeting her eyes. And we watch each other's backs. Over the next week, tensions in Willow Creek continued to simmer. Whitaker's men became a more visible presence in town, lounging outside businesses, watching people come and go. Sheriff Dixon made a show of increased patrols, but everyone knew whose interests he really protected. Elizabeth Cooper proceeded with her women's auxiliary meeting, though attendance was smaller than hoped. Penelope attended, of course, along with a few other stalwart souls, mostly widows or older women less susceptible to intimidation. They discussed practical ways to support Jenkins's candidacy, from distributing information to organizing a picnic where he could speak directly to families. When Penelope left the schoolhouse after the meeting, dusk was falling. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill and started the walk home, her mind preoccupied with the meeting's discussions. She was halfway home when she became aware of footsteps behind her. Glancing back, she saw two men following at a distance, ranch hands she recognized as Whitaker's employees. They made no attempt to hide their pursuit, and when they saw her look back, one of them called out, "Evening, Miss Fletcher. Dangerous for a lady to walk alone these days." Penelope quickened her pace, heart pounding. The men laughed, also walking faster. "We could escort you home," the other called. "Make sure you arrive safe." "No thank you," Penelope replied firmly, not looking back again. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the small derringer her father had insisted she carry. She had never fired it at a person and hoped tonight wouldn't be the first time. The footsteps behind her quickened. She was still 2 blocks from the apothecary, with few people on the streets at this hour. Just as panic began to rise in her throat, she heard another set of footsteps and a familiar voice. "Evening, gentlemen. Beautiful night for a walk." Henry Travis stepped out from a side street, positioning himself casually between Penelope and her pursuers. "This doesn't concern you, Travis," one of the men said, though with less confidence than before. "I'm just out for an evening stroll," Henry replied pleasantly. "Miss Fletcher, may I accompany you the rest of the way home?" Relief washed over her. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Travis." The ranch hands hesitated, clearly unhappy with this development but unwilling to confront Henry directly. "Whitaker ain't gonna like this," one of them muttered. "Mr. Whitaker is welcome to discuss his feelings with me directly anytime," Henry replied, his pleasant tone unchanged but something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Good evening, gentlemen." He offered Penelope his arm, which she took gratefully. They walked in silence until the sound of footsteps behind them faded away. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "Though I wonder how you happen to be in exactly the right place." "I've been keeping an eye on the schoolhouse during meetings," Henry admitted. After what happened to Elizabeth, it seemed prudent. Penelope wasn't sure whether to be grateful or annoyed at his presumption. "I can take care of myself, you know. I was carrying this." She showed him the derringer. Henry looked impressed. "Good, though I'm glad you didn't have to use it." "As am I," she conceded. They had reached the apothecary, but Penelope found herself reluctant to end their conversation. "Would you like to come in for coffee? My father would want to thank you properly." "I'd like that," Henry said with a smile that made her heart beat just a little faster. Inside, Gerald Fletcher was indeed effusive in his thanks. insisting that Henry join them for dinner as well. The three shared a simple but hearty meal, during which conversation flowed easily from local politics to books to Henry's travels. Penelope found herself watching Henry as he spoke with her father, noting the respect and genuine interest he showed in Gerald's medical knowledge. Most men in town viewed the apothecary with suspicion, or barely concealed disdain for his modern ideas. After dinner, Gerald excused himself to check on a special tincture he was brewing, leaving Penelope and Henry alone in the small sitting room adjacent to the shop. "Your father is a remarkable man," Henry said, gazing at the bookshelves that lined one wall. "It's clear where you get your intelligence and conviction. He sacrificed a promising career in Philadelphia to bring my mother west," Penelope replied, fond pride in her voice. "She was always frail, and doctors suggested the mountain air might improve her health. Did it?" "For a time," Penelope said softly. But then she began speaking out against the treatment of the Ute people, advocating for their rights to remain on their traditional lands. The town turned against her, called her an Indian lover, a troublemaker. Her voice hardened. The stress weakened her further, and when influenza came through. "I'm sorry," Henry said, genuine compassion in his voice. "She sounds like an extraordinary woman." "She was." Penelope smiled sadly. "Father never remarried, though many have tried to catch his attention over the years. He says he found his perfect match once, and lightning doesn't strike twice." Henry's eyes held hers. "Some people are fortunate enough to find that kind of love once in a lifetime." Something in his gaze made Penelope's breath catch. She looked away, suddenly flustered. "And what about you?" "Has lightning struck for Henry Travis?" A shadow crossed his face. "There was someone once, during the war. She was a nurse at the field hospital where I recovered from a wound." He paused. "She died at Andersonville, caring for Union prisoners." "I'm sorry," Penelope said, touched by the pain still evident in his expression. "It was a long time ago," he said, though his eyes suggested the wound remained fresh. "Since then, I've kept moving, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Until now." The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Henry's expression softened. "Until now, perhaps." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Penelope felt herself drawn toward him, even as caution whispered in her mind. The spell was broken by Gerald's return. If he noticed the charged atmosphere, he gave no indication, simply launching into a description of his experimental tincture. When Henry finally took his leave an hour later, he paused at the door, eyes meeting Penelope's. "Thank you for a lovely evening," he said. "It's been a long time since I've enjoyed such hospitality." "You're welcome anytime," Gerald assured him warmly. "Isn't that right, Penelope?" "Yes," she agreed, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Anytime." After Henry left, Gerald turned to his daughter with a knowing smile. "He's a good man, Penny." She hadn't heard that childhood nickname in years. "You can't possibly know that after one dinner, Father." "I've lived long enough to recognize genuine character when I see it," Gerald replied mildly, "and I've seen how he looks at you, Father." Penelope protested, embarrassed. Gerald chuckled. "Don't worry, I won't meddle, but I will say this. Your mother would have liked him." Coming from Randall Fletcher, there was no higher praise. The next morning, Penelope was arranging herbs to dry when the bell above the shop door jangled. She looked up, expecting a customer, but instead found Elizabeth Cooper rushing in, face flushed with excitement. "Penelope, the most incredible thing has happened," Elizabeth exclaimed. "Harold Jenkins has asked me to speak at his campaign rally next Sunday." "That's wonderful," Penelope said, genuinely pleased for her friend. "What will you speak about?" The importance of education funding and equal access for all children in the county, Elizabeth replied, eyes shining. He believes having a school teacher address these issues will help his platform. It's a brave choice, Penelope noted, especially after what happened with Whitaker. Elizabeth's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Yes, well, that's partly why I'm here. Jenkins suggested I ask if you would also speak about medical care for women and children. He says having two educated women support his candidacy would make a powerful statement. Penelope was taken aback. Public speaking was something she'd avoided, preferring to work quietly beside her father. But the thought of standing alongside Elizabeth, of publicly challenging Whitaker's vision for the county, stirred something within her. I'm not sure, she hedged. What does my father say? I haven't asked him yet, Elizabeth admitted. I wanted to gauge your interest first. Before Penelope could respond, the bell jangled again. Henry entered, removing his hat as he noticed the women. Good morning, ladies, he greeted them. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Elizabeth replied warmly. I was just telling Penelope about an opportunity to speak at Jenkins's rally. Henry raised an eyebrow. Is that so? That would be quite significant. It would also paint targets on our backs, Penelope pointed out. Whitaker already views us as troublemakers. True, Henry acknowledged. But hiding your knowledge and views won't change that. He's already marked you as opposition. What would you do? Penelope asked, curious about his perspective. Henry considered the question seriously. I believe in standing up for what's right, but I also believe in calculating risks. The question isn't whether speaking out is dangerous, it is. The question is whether the potential benefit outweighs the danger. And you think it does? Elizabeth asked. I think Whitaker as county commissioner would be devastating for this community, Henry replied simply. If your voices can help prevent that, then yes, I think it's worth the risk, especially if you take proper precautions. Like having armed escorts? Penelope asked with a touch of sarcasm. Henry smiled. Among other measures, but ultimately it's your decision. No one should make it for you. Elizabeth looked between them, a small smile playing at her lips. Well, I should get back to the schoolhouse. The children will be arriving soon. Think about it, Penelope, and let me know by tomorrow. After Elizabeth left, Penelope turned to Henry. Was there something you needed from the shop? Actually, I came to invite you to dinner, he said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. At the cafe this evening, if you're available. Penelope felt her heart skip. Dinner, just the two of us? Yes, Henry confirmed. I thought we might enjoy a conversation without being interrupted by Whitaker's men or well-meaning fathers. She couldn't help but smile at that. I'd like that, thank you. 7 o'clock. 7 would be perfect. After Henry left, Penelope tried to focus on her work, but found her mind wandering. The prospect of dinner with Henry both excited and unsettled her. She had been careful to keep men at a distance, knowing that romance typically led to marriage, and marriage in Willow Creek meant the end of her work at the apothecary. Few husbands would tolerate their wives mixing medicines and treating patients, but Henry seemed different. He respected her knowledge, encouraged her to speak out. Was it possible he would also respect her desire to continue her father's work? That evening, Penelope took more care than usual with her appearance, selecting a deep green dress that her father always said brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She pinned her auburn hair in a style slightly more elaborate than her usual practical arrangement, allowing a few curls to frame her face. Gerald watched her preparations with barely concealed delight. You look beautiful, my dear. It's just dinner, father, she said, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her own anticipation. Of course, he agreed, eyes twinkling. Just dinner with a man who looks at you as if you've hung the moon and stars. Father, Penelope protested, embarrassed but secretly pleased. The Willow Creek Café was a modest establishment, but Mrs. Hayworth, the owner, took pride in serving the best food in the county. When Penelope arrived, Henry was waiting outside, looking handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his usual trail dust nowhere to be seen. His eyes widened appreciatively as she approached. "You look beautiful, Penelope." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up rather well yourself." Inside, Mrs. Hayworth had given them a table by the window. Penelope was acutely aware of the curious glances from other diners. A single woman dining with a man who wasn't family was still something of a scandal in Willow Creek. But Henry seemed unfazed by the attention, focusing entirely on her. Over a meal of roast chicken and vegetables, they talked easily, moving from books they'd both read to memories of places they'd visited. Henry described the vastness of the prairie, the majesty of the mountains further west, the bustle of Chicago where he'd spent a winter after the war. "You've seen so much of the world," Penelope remarked. "Don't you ever want to settle in one place?" Something in Henry's expression shifted. "I've been thinking about that recently, actually." "Oh," Penelope tried to sound casual, though her heart had begun to race. "Yes." He looked directly at her. "I've spent years moving on whenever things got complicated. It seemed easier than facing difficulties, building something lasting. And now," she prompted when he paused, "now I'm wondering if perhaps there are things worth staying for," he said softly. "Worth fighting for." The intensity of his gaze left no doubt about his meaning. Penelope felt a warmth spread through her chest, even as caution tempered her response. "Willow Creek isn't an easy place to build something lasting," she said carefully. "Especially for those who challenge the established order." "The worthwhile things rarely come easily," Henry replied. He reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. "Penelope," he was interrupted by the cafe door banging open. Sheriff Dixon stomped in, scanning the room until his gaze landed on their table. He marched over, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Travis," he said gruffly, "need a word with you, outside." Henry's expression hardened, but he kept his voice level. "I'm in the middle of dinner, Sheriff." "Can it wait?" "Afraid not," Dixon insisted. "Town business." Henry glanced at Penelope apologetically. "I'll just be a moment." "It's all right," she assured him, though concern knitted her brow. "I'll wait." As Henry followed Dixon outside, Penelope tried to ignore the speculative murmurs from nearby tables. Through the window, she could see Henry and the sheriff engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation. Dixon gestured emphatically while Henry stood with arms crossed, his posture unyielding. After several minutes, Henry returned, his expression troubled. "Is everything all right?" Penelope asked as he sat down. "Dixon says there's been a complaint about me," Henry replied, keeping his voice low. "Allegedly threatening behavior towards some of Whitaker's men." "That's absurd," Penelope protested. "If anything, they've been threatening you and me. Dixon knows that. He's just doing Whitaker's bidding." Henry's mouth set in a grim line. "Apparently, my continued presence in town is causing tension." Fear gripped Penelope's heart. "He's trying to run you out of town." "It would seem so," Henry agreed. His eyes met hers. "I told him I have no intention of leaving." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern. "What will they do?" "Push harder, most likely." Henry reached for her hand again, this time taking it firmly in his. "Penelope, I'm sorry about this. The last thing I wanted was to bring trouble to your door." "You didn't," she said firmly. "Whitaker and his ilk were trouble long before you arrived. At least now someone is standing against them." Henry's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, sending a pleasant shiver up her arm. "I meant what I said before. There are things worth staying for, worth fighting for." The warmth in his eyes left no doubt about his meaning. Penelope felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. "I believe there are," she agreed softly. The remainder of their dinner was subdued but intimate, the shared concern creating a different kind of closeness. When Henry walked her home afterward, they were both acutely aware of eyes watching from shadowed doorways. At the apothecary door, Henry took her hand again. "I had a wonderful evening, despite the interruption." "So did I," Penelope admitted, looking up at him in the soft glow of the porch lantern. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. She found herself hoping he would. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Penelope," he said, his voice husky. "Good night, Henry," she replied, reluctant to go inside. He waited until she was safely indoors before departing, his tall figure disappearing into the darkness of the quiet street. The following days brought mounting tension to Willow Creek. Jenkins's campaign rally was scheduled for Sunday afternoon in the town square, and rumors swirled that both Elizabeth Cooper and Penelope Fletcher would be speaking. Opinions were divided. Some townsfolk expressed support for the women's participation, while others muttered about troublemakers and women forgetting their place. Whitaker made no secret of his opposition. His men became more aggressive in town, intimidating known Jenkins supporters. Sheriff Dixon looked the other way, claiming he couldn't arrest people for just standing around. On Saturday morning, Penelope was surprised to find Harold Jenkins himself visiting the apothecary. A tall, dignified man with salt and pepper hair, Jenkins had built a successful freight business before turning to politics. "Miss Fletcher," he greeted her warmly. "I hope I find you well." "Mr. Jenkins," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I do for you?" "I understand you're considering speaking at my rally tomorrow," he said, getting straight to the point. "I wanted to personally express how valuable your contribution would be." Penelope hesitated. She had spent days weighing the decision, torn between the desire to speak out and the fear of escalating tensions. "I'm still considering it," she admitted. "My father has concerns about potential repercussions." Jenkins nodded gravely. "Those concerns are legitimate. Whitaker plays rough, I know that better than most. But that's precisely why voices like yours and Miss Cooper's are so important. The people need to hear from those who understand what's truly at stake." "And what is that, in your view?" Penelope asked, testing his sincerity. "The soul of this county," Jenkins replied without hesitation. "Whether will be a place where power and money dictate everything, or where every citizen has rights and opportunities, where women like you can continue your valuable work without fear." His words resonated with Penelope. "You support women in professional roles, then?" "My late wife was a doctor," Jenkins said, a flicker of old pain crossing his face. "One of the first female graduates of medical school in Boston. She taught me that intelligence and capability have nothing to do with gender." This was news to Penelope. "I didn't know that." "She would have admired what you and your father have built here," Jenkins continued. "And she would have said that sometimes those with knowledge have a responsibility to share it, especially when others are being misled." As Jenkins left, promising that security measures were being arranged for the rally, Penelope found her resolve strengthening. When Henry stopped by later that day, she told him of her decision. "I'm going to speak tomorrow," she announced, "about the need for better medical care for women and children throughout the county, and how Jenkins's water rights policies would improve public health." Henry studied her face. "You're sure?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Hiding my views hasn't protected me from Whitaker's intimidation. Perhaps speaking them openly will inspire others to stand up as well." A slow smile spread across Henry's face. "You are a remarkable woman, Penelope Fletcher." She felt her cheeks warm under his admiring gaze. "Will you be there tomorrow?" "Try to keep me away," he replied. Then, more seriously, "Jenkins has asked several of us to help with security. Amos, Bill Cooper from the telegraph office, myself, and a few others." "You anticipate trouble?" Penelope asked, concern creeping into her voice. "I always anticipate trouble," Henry said. "That way I'm rarely surprised, but I don't think Whitaker will try anything too obvious in front of the whole town." Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect autumn day. Penelope dressed with care in her best blue dress, her father's wedding gift to her mother. Gerald had insisted she wear it. "Your mother would be so proud," he said, eyes bright with unshed tears as he pinned a cameo brooch at her collar. "You have her courage, Penny, and her fire." The town square was already crowded when they arrived. A simple platform had been erected, decorated with bunting and American flags. Harold Jenkins stood talking with Elizabeth and several supporters, while Henry and the other security volunteers positioned themselves strategically around the gathering. Whitaker and his men were also present, standing at the edges of the crowd, their expressions making their displeasure clear. Sheriff Dixon stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. Jenkins spotted Penelope and came to greet her, his face lighting up. "Miss Fletcher, I'm delighted you decided to join us. We've arranged for you to speak after Miss Cooper, if that's acceptable." "Yes, that's fine," Penelope agreed, suddenly nervous at the size of the crowd. She caught sight of Henry watching her from his position near the platform, and he gave her an encouraging nod that somehow calmed her racing heart. The rally began with Jenkins outlining his vision for the county fair: water rights, improved roads, support for small businesses as well as ranches, better funding for schools and medical care. The crowd responded positively, though Whitaker's men jeered occasionally from the sidelines. When Elizabeth stepped up to speak about educational needs, Penelope felt a surge of pride in her friend's composure and clarity. Elizabeth addressed the crowd confidently, outlining how Jenkins's policies would benefit children throughout the county, particularly those in remote areas who currently had limited access to education. Then it was Penelope's turn. As she climbed the steps to the platform, she caught sight of her father's encouraging smile and Henry's steady gaze. Drawing a deep breath, she faced the crowd. "Good people of Willow Creek and the surrounding county," she began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I stand before you not as a politician, but as someone who has worked alongside my father to provide medical care to this community for many years." She spoke about the health challenges facing women and children in remote areas, the need for clean water sources that Whitaker's cattle were increasingly contaminating, and the importance of having a commissioner who understood that public health affected everyone's prosperity. "When women and children thrive, communities thrive," she concluded. "Mr. Jenkins understands this fundamental truth, and that is why he has my support." The applause was substantial, though not universal. As Penelope stepped down, she felt a wave of relief and accomplishment. She had spoken her truth publicly, and the sky hadn't fallen. Jenkins returned to the platform to close the rally, thanking both women for their contributions. As the crowd began to disperse, Penelope found herself surrounded by well-wishers, mostly women expressing appreciation for her words. She was speaking with Mrs. Peterson when a commotion erupted near the edge of the square. Turning, she saw Whitaker confronting Jenkins, his face flushed with anger. Their words weren't audible from this distance, but Whitaker's aggressive posture was clear. Henry and several other men moved quickly toward the confrontation. Before they could reach them, Whitaker suddenly shoved Jenkins hard, sending the older man staggering backward. The crowd gasped. Sheriff Dixon finally seemed to rouse himself, moving toward the altercation, but he was too far away to intervene quickly. Henry reached Whitaker first, positioning himself between the rancher and Jenkins, who was being helped to his feet by supporters. "That's enough, Whitaker," Henry said, his voice carrying across the now silent square. "This doesn't concern you, Travis," Whitaker snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. "I'm making it my concern," Henry replied evenly. "You want to settle something with Jenkins. Do it with words like a civilized man, not fists and certainly not guns." Sheriff Dixon arrived, looking flustered. "Now, Randall, let's not make a scene." "Too late for that," Whitaker spat. His eyes swept the crowd until they found Penelope. "This is your doing, Fletcher. You and that schoolteacher filling people's heads with nonsense." Penelope felt the crowd's eyes turn to her. For a moment, fear gripped her, but then she straightened her spine and stepped forward. "The only nonsense today came from those trying to intimidate honest citizens," she said clearly. "People deserve to hear all perspectives before making their choice." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Whitaker's face darkened further. "You'll regret this," he threatened, his gaze moving between Penelope, Jenkins, and Henry. "All of you." With that, he stormed away, his men following. Sheriff Dixon hesitated, then trailed after them, looking relieved to escape the tense situation. As the crowd dispersed, discussing the dramatic turn of events, Henry approached Penelope. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "The bravest people usually are," he replied with a smile, "but they act anyway." Gerald joined them, beaming with pride. "Your mother would have cheered the loudest, my dear." Jenkins approached next, his expression serious despite the success of the rally. "I must thank you all, but also warn you. Whitaker isn't one to make idle threats. I'd advise caution in the coming days." "We'll be careful," Gerald assured him. "And I hope you will be as well." As they walked home, Penelope found herself between her father and Henry, aware of the protective positioning but too exhilarated from the day's events to mind. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait for Election Day," Henry replied, "and we remain vigilant." "Do you think Jenkins can win?" she asked, glancing up at him. "After today?" "Yes," Henry said confidently. "People respond to courage, especially when it's displayed by those they might not expect it from." His eyes met hers, warm with admiration, and Penelope felt something unfurl in her chest, hope, perhaps, or something even more profound. The days following the rally were tense but quiet. Whitaker retreated to his ranch, and his men were less visible in town. Some took this as a good sign. Others, including Henry, viewed it with suspicion. "He's planning something," Henry said to Penelope as they walked together after church the following Sunday. They had fallen into the habit of these Sunday walks, a socially acceptable way to spend time together that had quickly become the highlight of Penelope's week. "What could he do?" she asked. "The election is only days away, and Jenkins seems to have substantial support." "That's what worries me," Henry admitted. "Whitaker isn't the type to accept defeat gracefully." They had reached the small bridge over the creek that gave the town its name. Penelope paused, watching the water flow beneath them, golden leaves dancing on its surface. "Whatever comes, I'm glad I spoke out," she said after a moment. "Even if it changes nothing, I'll know I didn't remain silent when it mattered." Henry's hand covered hers where it rested on the bridge railing. "It changed something in me," he said softly. She looked up, finding his eyes on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What do you mean?" "I came to Willow Creek with no intention of staying," he explained. "I've spent years drifting, never letting myself put down roots. But then I saw you stand up to Whitaker that first day, so fierce and principled, and something shifted inside me. Penelope's heart raced. And now I find myself thinking about a future here in this town, Henry said, his voice low and earnest. A future that includes you if you'll have me. Time seemed to stop. Around them, the autumn leaves continued to fall, the creek continued to flow, but Penelope was aware only of Henry's face, so open and vulnerable, and the warmth of his hand on hers. Henry, the sound of approaching horses interrupted her. They both turned to see two riders approaching at speed, one of Jenkins's supporters from a nearby farm. "Travis," the man called as he reined in his horse. "Thank God I found you." "It's Jenkins, his barn's been set ablaze, and Whitaker's men are preventing anyone from fighting the fire." Henry's expression hardened instantly. "How many men with Whitaker?" "6 or 7, the rider replied. "Armed. They've got Jenkins and his hands cornered." Henry turned to Penelope, conflict clear in his eyes. "I have to go." "I know," she said, already reaching for her medical bag, which she carried habitually. "I'm coming with you." "Penelope, it's too dangerous. People may be hurt," she said firmly. "I can help." The look they exchanged contained 1,000 unspoken words. Finally, Henry nodded. "Stay behind me, and if I tell you to take cover, you do it immediately." "Agreed." Henry turned to the rider. "Round up Amos Peterson and Bill Cooper, anyone else willing to stand with Jenkins. Have them meet us at the Jenkins place, and send someone for Sheriff Dixon. Not that I expect him to help, but he should be notified." The rider nodded and galloped back toward town. Henry helped Penelope onto the second horse, then swung up behind her. The closeness of his body against hers would have been distracting under other circumstances, but now she focused only on what lay ahead. They rode hard, reaching Jenkins's ranch in 20 minutes. The scene that greeted them was chaos, a large barn fully engulfed in flames, smoke billowing into the clear blue sky. Several men were attempting to form a bucket line from the nearby well, but they were being kept at bay by armed figures on horseback. Henry reined in their horse at a safe distance, scanning the situation. "Stay here," he instructed Penelope, helping her down. "At least until we know what we're dealing with." He rode closer, approaching Jenkins, who stood defiantly facing Whitaker. Penelope couldn't hear their exchange, but the body language was clear. Whitaker was making demands, Jenkins refusing them. One of Whitaker's men shoved Jenkins roughly, sending the older man to the ground. Henry dismounted in one fluid motion, striding forward to help Jenkins up. Words were exchanged, tensions visibly rising. Suddenly, a shot rang out. People scattered for cover as one of Whitaker's men fired into the air. "That's enough," Whitaker's voice carried to where Penelope stood frozen. "Jenkins, you have 1 hour to decide. Withdraw from the race, or the house burns next." Henry stepped forward, his voice too low for Penelope to hear, but whatever he said made Whitaker's face contort with rage. The rancher wheeled his horse around and galloped toward Penelope's position, his men following. As they thundered past, Whitaker spotted her and reined in sharply. "Fletcher's daughter," he sneered. "Here to patch up your friends. You'll be busy. Anyone who stands with Jenkins is going to need doctoring." Before she could respond, Henry appeared beside her, his expression murderous. "Ride on, Whitaker. You've done enough damage today." "This isn't over," Whitaker spat, but he spurred his horse onward, his men following in a cloud of dust. As soon as they were gone, Penelope rushed to where Jenkins sat on an overturned barrel, holding a cloth to a gash on his forehead. "Let me see," she said, opening her bag. "It's nothing, Miss Fletcher," Jenkins protested, though he winced when she gently removed the cloth. "A head wound is never nothing," she replied firmly, examining the cut. "This needs cleaning and stitches." While she worked on Jenkins, more men arrived from town, including Amos Peterson and Bill Cooper. They joined the bucket line, working to prevent the fire from spreading to other buildings. "What happened?" Henry asked Jenkins as Penelope stitched his wound with practiced efficiency. "Whitaker and his men rode up about an hour ago," Jenkins explained grimly. "Said he wanted to discuss my withdrawal from the race. When I refused, they set the barn ablaze and prevented us from fighting the fire effectively." "Did he actually say he'd set the house on fire next?" Henry asked. "In those exact words," Jenkins confirmed, with witnesses present. Henry's jaw tightened. "That's no longer political intimidation, that's criminal threatening." "Sheriff Dixon won't see it that way," Jenkins said wearily. "Not when it's Whitaker." "Then we'll have to handle this another way," Henry replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. As Penelope finished bandaging Jenkins's wound, she caught Henry's eye. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time Whitaker faced consequences," Henry said. "Real ones." After ensuring that Jenkins was stable and the fire contained to the barn, which was already a lost cause, Henry helped Penelope onto their borrowed horse for the ride back to town. "You're planning something," she said as they rode, her back pressed against his chest. "Whitaker crossed a line today," Henry replied, his voice tight. "Threatening to burn down a man's home goes beyond election intimidation. If the law won't stop him, someone has to." Fear gripped Penelope's heart. "What are you going to do?" "First, I'm taking you home safely," Henry said, avoiding a direct answer. "Then I'm going to have a conversation with some people in town." "Henry," she pressed, twisting to look at his face, "don't do anything reckless." His expression softened slightly. "I won't, I promise." But there was something in his eyes that worried her, a steely resolve that suggested he'd already made decisions she might not approve of. When they reached the apothecary, Gerald rushed out, having heard about the fire. "Thank heavens you're both safe," he exclaimed, helping Penelope down. "Is Jenkins all right?" "He will be," Penelope assured him. "A nasty cut, but I stitched it. The barn is lost, though." Gerald's expression darkened. "This has gone too far. Whitaker must be stopped." "My thoughts exactly," Henry agreed, not dismounting. "I need to see some people." "I'll come back later if I may." "Of course," Gerald nodded. "Be careful, son." The term of affection wasn't lost on either Henry or Penelope. Their eyes met briefly, a world of unspoken feeling passing between them before Henry rode away. Inside, Penelope recounted the day's events to her father while washing the blood and soot from her hands. "I'm worried about what Henry might do," she confessed. "He seemed determined." Gerald considered this. "Henry Travis strikes me as a man who understands limits." "He won't do anything foolish." "I hope you're right," Penelope said, staring out the window at the now empty street. "I never got to answer him." "Answer what?" Gerald asked gently. "Before we heard about the fire," Penelope explained, "he was telling me he's considering staying in Willow Creek permanently, that he sees a future here, with me." Gerald's face broke into a wide smile. "And what would your answer have been had you not been interrupted?" Penelope felt a blush warm her cheeks. "I think I would have said yes." "Then tell him that," Gerald said simply, "when he returns." But Henry didn't return that evening. As darkness fell, Penelope's worry grew. She paced the sitting room, stopping frequently to peer out the window at the quiet street. "Perhaps he was detained," Gerald suggested, though concern had begun to crease his brow as well. Just as Penelope was considering going to look for him, there was a sharp knock at the door. Her heart leapt, but when Gerald opened it, Sheriff Dixon stood on the porch, his expression grim. "Evening, Fletcher," he said gruffly. "Need to speak with your daughter." "What about?" Penelope asked, stepping forward. Dixon shifted uncomfortably. "It's about Henry Travis. He's been arrested." Penelope felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. "Arrested? On what charge?" "Assault and attempted murder," Dixon replied, not meeting her eyes. "He attacked Randall Whitaker this evening, beat him pretty badly before Whitaker's men pulled him off." "That's absurd," Penelope protested. "Henry wouldn't, witnesses say different," Dixon cut her off. "3 men saw him ride up to Whitaker's office in town, call him out, and start swinging the moment Whitaker appeared." Gerald placed a steadying hand on Penelope's shoulder. "Is Travis being held at the jail?" Dixon nodded. "Trial's set for tomorrow morning. Judge Wilson is coming in special." "That's unusually fast," Gerald remarked, suspicion clear in his voice. Dixon shrugged. "Whitaker's influential, and he's hurt bad, might not make it, according to Doc Miller." After Dixon left, Penelope turned to her father, panic rising in her throat. "This isn't right. Henry wouldn't just attack Whitaker without provocation, and a trial tomorrow, they're railroading him." "I agree," Gerald said grimly. "Get your shawl. We're going to the jail." The small Willow Creek jail consisted of just 2 cells at the back of the sheriff's office. When Gerald and Penelope arrived, they found the door locked, a deputy they didn't recognize standing guard outside. "No visitors," the man said flatly when they approached. "Sheriff's orders." "I'm a medical professional," Gerald argued. "If the prisoner is injured, I should examine him." "He ain't injured," the deputy replied. "And Doc Miller's already seen to Whitaker." "Then I want to see Travis as his legal counsel," Gerald tried again. "He don't get counsel till the trial," the deputy said, unmoved. "Those are the rules." Frustrated, they were forced to retreat. As they walked back toward the apothecary, Penelope fought tears of fear and anger. "They're going to hang him," she whispered. "Without a fair trial or even a chance to defend himself." Gerald squeezed her hand. "We won't let that happen. Henry has friends here now, people who will stand for him as he stood for them." Through the night, Gerald and Penelope worked to spread the word about Henry's arrest and the suspicious circumstances surrounding it. Amos Peterson, Bill Cooper, and several others who had come to respect Henry promised to be at the trial, ready to testify to his character if needed. Elizabeth Cooper arrived at dawn, having heard the news. "This is clearly Whitaker's revenge," she said, outrage coloring her voice. "First Jenkins, now Henry. He's trying to eliminate all opposition before the election." "But to claim Henry tried to kill him," Penelope shook her head. "Even with false witnesses, that's a serious charge. Serious enough to get Henry hanged if Whitaker dies," Gerald pointed out grimly, "and conveniently remove a strong voice against Whitaker's tactics." "How is Whitaker, actually?" Elizabeth asked. "Is he truly at death's door as they're claiming?" "We don't know," Gerald admitted. "Doc Miller is firmly in Whitaker's pocket, so his assessment can't be trusted, and they won't let me examine him." As the clock struck 9, they made their way to the town hall, where the hasty trial would be held. A crowd had already gathered, opinions clearly divided between those who believed Henry guilty and those who suspected Whitaker's machinations. Inside, Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man known for his harsh sentences, sat at a table at the front of the room. Sheriff Dixon stood nearby, looking uncomfortable but determined. And there, between 2 deputies, stood Henry. Penelope gasped at his appearance. His face was bruised, one eye swollen, and he held himself stiffly, suggesting injury to his ribs or torso. But his eyes were clear and steady, scanning the room until they found her. The relief in his expression when he saw her was palpable. The trial, if it could be called that, proceeded with disturbing speed. Whitaker, apparently too injured to attend, had provided a written statement claiming Henry had attacked him without provocation, shouting about teaching him a lesson for the barn burning. 3 witnesses, All Whitaker's men testified to seeing Henry throw the first punch and continue beating Whitaker savagely, even after the rancher was on the ground. According to them, they'd had to physically drag Henry off to save Whitaker's life. When Henry finally was allowed to speak, his voice was steady despite his injuries. "I did confront Whitaker," he admitted. After witnessing his men burn down Harold Jenkins's barn and hearing Whitaker himself threaten to burn his house next, "I told him I was placing him under citizen's arrest for arson and criminal threatening." A murmur ran through the crowd. "You have no authority to make arrests, Travis," Judge Wilson pointed out. "Any citizen can make an arrest when they witness a felony," Henry countered. "Arson is a felony." "I informed Whitaker I was taking him to the sheriff's office. That's when he and his men attacked me. I defended myself, but I never beat him as they described. In fact, once I was outnumbered, they were the ones who delivered a beating to me." "Convenient story," Judge Wilson said dismissively. "But we have 3 witnesses against your word." "What about the witnesses at Jenkins's ranch?" Penelope called out, unable to remain silent. "They heard Whitaker threaten to burn down the house." "Silence in the court," Wilson banged his gavel. "Outbursts will not be tolerated." Harold Jenkins stood up, the bandage on his head stark against his gray hair. "I was there, Your Honor. Travis is telling the truth. Whitaker threatened to burn my house if I didn't withdraw from the election." "So was I," said Amos Peterson, rising. "I heard it too after I arrived to help with the fire." Wilson looked displeased as several other men also stood, confirming they had witnessed Whitaker's threats. "This isn't about the barn fire," he insisted. "This is about Travis's attack on Whitaker." "They're connected," Henry said firmly. "Whitaker committed arson and made threats. I attempted a legal citizen's arrest. He and his men assaulted me, then fabricated this story to silence me before the election." The room erupted in conflicting shouts. Judge Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. "Enough." He finally bellowed. "This court finds the evidence against Travis compelling. He is hereby." The doors at the back of the hall burst open. A hush fell as Randall Whitaker himself strode in, looking remarkably healthy for a man supposedly at death's door. A few bandages and bruises were visible, but he walked steadily and showed no signs of life-threatening injury. "Mr. Whitaker," Judge Wilson exclaimed, "we were told you were too injured to attend." "I heard there was some question about my condition," Whitaker said smoothly. "I didn't want to delay justice over a misunderstanding." Penelope exchanged glances with her father. Whitaker's appearance confirmed their suspicions. The severity of his injuries had been exaggerated to strengthen the case against Henry. "Since you're here," Wilson said, "perhaps you'd like to testify directly about Travis's attack." "Certainly," Whitaker agreed, taking the seat indicated. He proceeded to repeat the same story his men had told, that Henry had attacked him unprovoked, beaten him severely, and threatened his life. When he finished, Henry spoke up. "If I beat you as badly as you claim, Mr. Whitaker, how is it you're able to walk in here today without assistance? Doc Miller reported you might not survive." Whitaker's face darkened. "I'm tougher than most, Travis. And Miller's always been cautious in his assessments." "Or perhaps," Gerald Fletcher suggested, standing, "the injuries were never as severe as reported. As a medical professional, I find Mr. Whitaker's rapid recovery miraculous." "This is absurd," Whitaker snapped. "3 witnesses saw Travis attack me." "3 of your own men," Jenkins pointed out. "Hardly impartial witnesses." The crowd was growing restless, many now openly questioning Whitaker's version of events. Judge Wilson, sensing he was losing control of the proceedings, banged his gavel. "Order." "I've heard enough. Based on the testimony provided, I find Henry Travis guilty of assault. Sentencing will, "Your Honor," interrupted a new voice. Sheriff Dixon had stepped forward, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I believe there's additional evidence to consider." Everyone stared in shock. Dixon had never gone against Whitaker before. "What evidence?" Wilson demanded. Dixon reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "A statement from Tom Burke, one of Whitaker's men who was present during the altercation with Travis. He came to me early this morning with a very different account of what happened." Whitaker jumped to his feet. "Burke is a drunk and a liar. His word means nothing." "Let the sheriff read the statement," Henry said calmly. Dixon unfolded the paper. "Burke states that Whitaker ordered him and others to ambush Travis yesterday evening, after learning Travis was gathering witnesses to the barn burning. They were instructed to teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. When Travis approached Whitaker's office to discuss the barn incident, they jumped him from behind. Travis fought back in self-defense, but was eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers. Whitaker then ordered them to bring Travis to the jail and claim he had been the aggressor." The room erupted. Whitaker's face contorted with fury as he lunged toward Dixon. "You treacherous!" Henry moved with surprising speed despite his injuries, intercepting Whitaker before he could reach the sheriff. "That's enough," he said firmly, restraining the struggling rancher. "Arrest him," Whitaker shouted. "He's attacking me again." But the mood in the room had shifted. Several men, including Jenkins and Peterson, had moved to stand near Henry, clearly supporting him. Even Judge Wilson looked uncertain now. "Sheriff," Wilson said finally, "given this new evidence, I believe we need to reconsider the charges against Travis, and possibly consider charges against Mr. Whitaker for false testimony and obstruction of justice." Whitaker struggled in Henry's grip. "This is outrageous. I'm the victim here." "The only victims," Penelope said clearly, stepping forward, "are those you've intimidated, threatened, and attacked Mr. Jenkins, whose property you destroyed, Elizabeth Cooper, whom you struck for speaking her mind, and Henry Travis, whom you falsely accused to silence him." Her words seemed to galvanize the crowd. Murmurs of agreement spread, growing louder as more people voiced their support. Judge Wilson, seeing which way the wind was blowing, made a quick decision. "Sheriff, take Mr. Whitaker into custody pending investigation of these new allegations. Mr. Travis is released on his own recognizance, until a proper hearing can be arranged with witnesses from both the barn incident and yesterday's altercation." As Dixon and a deputy led a protesting Whitaker away, the crowd surged forward to congratulate Henry and express their support. Penelope pushed through them, desperate to reach him. When she finally broke through the press of bodies, Henry was there, battered but smiling, his eyes finding hers immediately. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him, mindful of his injuries but unable to contain her relief. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered against his shoulder. His arms tightened around her. "Never," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." In the days that followed, Willow Creek experienced a seismic shift in its power structure. With Burke's testimony and additional witnesses coming forward, Randall Whitaker found himself facing serious charges of arson, assault, and witness intimidation. Judge Wilson, sensing the changing tide, suddenly became very concerned with the proper application of justice. The election proceeded as scheduled, with Harold Jenkins winning a resounding victory. His first act as county commissioner was to appoint a committee to review water rights and ensure fair access for small farmers and ranchers. Sheriff Dixon, perhaps seeing an opportunity for redemption, became surprisingly diligent in his duties. His last-minute decision to present Burke's statement had earned him some grudging respect, though many suspected it was motivated more by self-preservation than moral awakening. For Henry and Penelope, the aftermath brought both challenges and opportunities. Henry's injuries healed slowly, giving him ample reason to visit the apothecary daily for treatment. These visits inevitably extended into long conversations with Penelope and Gerald, strengthening the bonds between them. 2 weeks after the trial, on a crisp November evening, Henry invited Penelope for a walk. They strolled to the bridge where they'd stood before, the creek now carrying the last of autumn's leaves toward the river. "I've been thinking a lot about that day," Henry said, leaning against the railing. "About what I was trying to tell you before we heard about the fire." Penelope's heart quickened. "I've thought about it too." "I meant what I said," Henry continued, turning to face her fully, "about seeing a future here, with you, but I realize I never gave you a chance to respond." "You didn't," she agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. Henry took her hand, his expression serious yet tender. "Penelope Fletcher, I've spent years wandering, never letting myself put down roots. But from the moment I saw you stand up to Whitaker that first day, I knew you were someone extraordinary, someone worth staying for." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with your courage, your intelligence, your compassion, and if you'll have me, I want to build a life here with you." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I've been so careful for so long," she said softly. "Keeping men at a distance because I feared marriage would mean giving up my work, my voice." "I would never ask you to be less than who you are," Henry assured her. "Your work is important. Your voice is important. I don't want to silence either. I want to stand beside you while you use them." "In that case," Penelope said, stepping closer, "my answer is yes. I love you, Henry Travis, and I would very much like to build that life with you." His smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms. This time, there were no interruptions as his lips found hers in a gentle, perfect first kiss that promised many more to come. Spring came early to Willow Creek in 1877. The hills greened quickly after a mild winter, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows above town. On a perfect May morning, Penelope Fletcher became Penelope Travis in a ceremony attended by nearly the entire town. Elizabeth Cooper caught the bridal bouquet, blushing furiously when Harold Jenkins winked at her from across the crowd. Their own courtship had blossomed over the winter months, nurtured by shared values and mutual respect. Randall Whitaker was conspicuously absent, having been sentenced to 3 years in the territorial prison. Without his oppressive influence, Willow Creek seemed to breathe easier, growing and changing in ways that benefited all its citizens. Henry had partnered with Amos Peterson to expand the livery stable into a successful horse breeding business, while Penelope continued her work at the apothecary alongside her father. Their wedding gift from Gerald had been a parcel of land adjacent to the apothecary, where Henry was building them a home with a special room for Penelope's medical studies. As they danced at their wedding celebration, Henry held Penelope close, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. "Did you ever imagine when you first rode into Willow Creek that you'd end up here?" Penelope asked, her eyes shining with happiness. "Never," Henry admitted with a laugh. "I was just looking for a quiet drink, remember? Instead, I found a woman being hit for speaking out, and everything changed." "I remember what you said to me that day at the apothecary," Penelope said softly. "You don't have to lower your voice here." No one had ever told me that before. Henry's arms tightened around her, and I meant it. "Your voice is one of the many things I love about you, Penelope Travis." "I love you, Henry Travis," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as their friends and neighbors applauded around them. In the years that followed, Penelope never did lower her voice. With Henry's unwavering support, she expanded the apothecary's services, eventually studying formally to become one of Colorado Territory's first licensed female doctors. Henry's horse breeding business thrived, allowing them to build a small clinic where Penelope could treat patients regardless of their ability to pay. They welcomed 2 children, a daughter with her mother's fire and a son with his father's steady calm. Both grew up knowing that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the determination to speak and act despite it. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Henry and Penelope would often sit on their porch, hands entwined, watching the sun set over the mountains that had once seemed to limit their world, but now formed the perfect backdrop for the life. They'd built together, a life where neither of them ever had to lower their voice again.